Let me tell you a little bit more about the contents of the book. Each chapter takes one issue and then leads the student teacher through a discussion of that issue, looking at examples of the experiences of teachers. And then there are discussion questions and follow-up activities. The sort of issues that we've talked about, the nature of teacher learning. What do we mean by learning to teach, and how does this work in the context of practice teaching? We look at the nature of the context in which the student teacher will do his or her practice teaching, because teaching contexts vary enormously. The kind of institution, the kind of classroom in which you're teaching, and the dynamics of that classroom will have an important influence on your whole understanding of teaching. So we look at that issue very carefully. Who are you working with? Who's your cooperating teacher? In other words, the teacher who's normally teaching that class, who you'll be a guest teacher in his or her class, or the supervising teacher who's going to be working with you and guiding you through that process. Can be a painful experience sometimes, but we try to show you how to make that a productive experience, working with a mentor teacher or a cooperating teacher as you do your teaching practice. Planning, of course. What are some of the issues involved in planning a successful lesson? What sort of planning goes on before you teach, and how do those plans affect what you do when you actually get into the classroom? Do you stick with those plans, or do you find you need to modify them based on what happens in the classroom? What do we mean by an effective language lesson? What are some of the characteristics of a good language lesson? How can we plan for those? How can we work to create those during the process of teaching itself? That's the focus of an important chapter in the book. We also look at procedures for classroom observation, because many student teachers start out through an observation experience, watching either videos of experienced teachers or sitting on the classes of experienced teachers. So we look at what you can learn from observation, what procedures are useful in taking part in observation experiences. We also look at the classroom learning environment. How does the motivational, the affective side of the classroom, the human side of the classroom work? What can you do to make sure that students are receptive, are motivated and keen to learn, and how can you deal with trouble spots that come up there? Classroom management issues are discussed there. We also look at learner-centered teaching in one chapter. When we start our teaching, we're often very focused on ourselves, our performance as a teacher, and how well students and supervisors perceive us. But what's important is to move away from a focus on oneself to a focus on the learner. How can that be accomplished? That's then a focus of one of the chapters. Language, the language of teaching. How can you use English both as the content of a lesson, but also as the medium of a lesson, in such a way that it scaffolds and supports and helps build students' capacity in English. So we have a chapter that looks at the language of classroom instruction, the language of teacher-student interaction. And then lastly, we look at ways in which you can explore and monitor your own teaching, exploring your own teaching and reviewing and reflecting on what you've gained from the experience of teaching. So that's the basic outline of the book. It's very readable. We've tried to make it as teacher-friendly as possible. So I hope you'll find it a useful resource for you.